Hello, School Transportation Nation. It's Tony Corcoran. We're glad you're back with us on the podcast. I have with me Mr. Ryan Gray, always informed about everything happening in the school transportation industry. Ryan, welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Tony. And Nation, it's always great to be with you.
Wonderful. And hey, guys, this episode is brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software, and by School Radio, your source for reliable radio communications. In just a short bit, Ms. Taylor Ekbatani is going to be speaking with Michael Miller, the transportation director of Sycamore Community Schools in Ohio and president of the Ohio Association for Pupil Transportation, along with Todd Silverthorn, the second OAPT vice president and transportation director for Kettering School District in Ohio, which I believe we had Todd on out at STN Expo East. So great to catch up with him again and find out what's going on over there in Ohio. So good stuff. I know we got some great other things happening. We've got our June issue. If you guys haven't gone to the stnonline.com website, go check out the brand new edition of June. Ryan's going to be running down his top stories. So we'll dive into that. We've got some STN Expo West updates. The registration deadline is June 6th for the early bird registration to save $100. Don't hesitate. Go over to stnexpo.com/west to dive into that. And we've got more headlines coming up in just a second. Hey, safety is a number one priority for everyone in school transportation, and even more so when needing to communicate in a school bus setting. School radios push-to-talk over cellular or POC radios are the safety enhancement you need to provide clear communication across all aspects of your fleet. Schools, SROs, that's school resource officers, and beyond. School radio helps take safety and connectivity a step further by offering interoperability solutions that bridge conventional two-way radios with POC systems, creating a unified network that boosts effectiveness and safety. This integrated strategy guarantees smooth communication in both emergency situations and daily activities. To learn more about how school radio can improve safety in your communication methods, visit school-radio.com. That's school-radio.com. All right, we're back. Ryan, all right, hit us with the good stuff. I know you've got a lot of news headlines. There was a really expensive settlement that came out of Colorado. What happened there?
Absolutely. If you consider $16.2 million expensive, I certainly do. It's another abuse case, again, dealing with an attendant. So we've seen too many of these in recent years. And similarly, at the same time, NCST, the National Congress on School Transportation, approved a proposal to recommend attendants be on all routes that are transporting students with disabilities. So potentially more attendants out there, monitors, if you will. A lot of talk over the last several years about how the presence of those additional employees, paraprofessionals, if you will, on these routes can help with driver retention, because student behavior is always one of the biggest concerns for school bus drivers, and one of the reasons, leading reasons why many school bus drivers leave the position. So when you're talking about recruiting and retention, attendance for a lot of folks moves the needle. Well, a black eye put on the industry, or at least Padre School District in Colorado a few years ago. I think this goes back to the 22-23 school year. And an attendant was evidently hired and had a previous child abuse conviction. It was a misdemeanor on the record. And really kind of diving into this, our writer, Amanda Pampuro, she's actually a legal writer based out there in the Denver area, and did a really great job of explaining what happened. And a lot of folks would think, well, wait a second, how could an attendant be hired with a criminal background? Well, according to state law in Colorado, especially for child abuse, it has to be a felony. And evidently, this employee actually lied when they were hired as well, so that came out. But apparently, this attendant actually convicted now of this abuse against this child, and there was actually some other complaints as well. But this one particular lawsuit that settled on May 14th, it was based on this one student, and pretty sad to hear what happened with this student. They were secured in their school bus seat. This abuse happened over many months. This student was disabled, nonverbal, unable to ask for help, tell their parents what was happening, tell a teacher. This student had autism at an elementary school, and it was called names, was physically assaulted. I think there were a couple quotes in there in the lawsuit. Pretty nasty. Tyler Zanella, who was the employee, calling the child a little F word, a little SH word. If the child was his kid, he would be dead by now because he did not have that kind of patience. Why this person was an attendant to begin with, it's mind-boggling. But certainly, when you see such a large settlement, and there's some states that have caps on these kind of things, and I know that there was another case that was finalized, I guess, in Florida earlier this year. Another, I believe that one might have been a school bus driver. It might have been a crash. I don't remember exactly, but they had a limit by state statute. So they actually had to go to special session at the legislature and pass that so that the school board could release those funds. It was such an egregious case. So again, training, Tony, we talk about it all over and over again. How important it is and how important technology can be. Talk to a lot of experts, especially in terms of transporting students with disabilities, who say if you have cameras, and a lot of school buses now do have surveillance cameras, if you're not regularly looking at the footage, it does you no good. And evidently there were cameras on these school buses at the time, but certainly part of the money that the school district has had to pay is also looking at how they operate. So they brought in consultants to make a number of recommendations to basically improve their internal policies. I mean, spent over $2 million. So if you look at that $2 million that was spent, then another $16.2 million, it just goes to show you, the liability that's on the table if school districts are not doing everything they need to do or should do in terms of their due diligence.
Yeah, Ryan, this kind of comes back to, I was having a conversation with someone about the challenge of having all this video footage on school buses and not enough manpower or human capital to review the video, right? And we're starting to see AI provide additional value in terms of looking through the footage, right? We see that in law enforcement. We see that in some other categories. It necessarily hasn't matriculated to school transportation, but here it is time and time again. If the video footage was reviewed, this potentially could have been caught. The AI will only identify maybe behavioral things, altercations between students, bullying. Here you have a staff member abusing a child. How does the camera recognize that? How does it see it? How does it interpret it? How does it notify? So it's very interesting. So I think it's only as good as the inputs, but this again tells the tale of, good video review, consistent video review being important, and not just assuming everything's just hunky-dory all the time, especially when it comes to special needs. And regular ed, maybe people have not as a focused feel, but the special needs children are obviously a lot more vulnerable. And this is not the first time or second time or the 10th time. It keeps happening. And this is just what's been reported, right? I'm sure there's many incidents we don't hear about that this stuff happens. So, and we touch on this at the TSD conference down in Dallas and Frisco. And here it is again. And that was a very expensive situation, 16 million plus. And definitely the PR nightmare of that does not sit well inside the community.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about AI, and I always like to say AI-enabled software, this is what the industry is working toward. In fact, in our May magazine issue, we have an article, The Future is Now, where it talks about AI-enabled software being able to track and act upon not only what's the school bus drivers doing behind the wheel. We see a lot of that with the driver coaching and the tie-in with the telematics and being able to, issue reports sometimes in real time to transportation management so they can act immediately. But also an emerging trend or technology is what you're talking about, Tony, where it's monitoring the student behavior as well as the employee behavior. And all the modeling can show that, again, maybe not preventing it from happening, but certainly nipping it in the bud, where AI enabled software and these cameras can identify trends. They can identify with set parameters, is an employee doing something they shouldn't be doing? When you're securing a student, for example, in a car seat, if they're smaller, if they're a baby or infant, or even in some of the child safety restraint systems based upon their disability or condition, if there's certain actions that the employee needs to make that are conducive with securing that strap or that vest, that's one thing. But the video can tell, okay, wait, that wasn't a buckling of a strap. That was a backhand to the child's face, or that was a shove. That was, just like you can see with some of the G forces from the vehicle telematics, and then tying in with the cameras on the dash cam. These cameras are going the direction of being able to flag certain instances, at least for review, because you're talking about, that's always been the issue and continues to be, that most school districts don't have the staff to continuously review all the hours of footage just in one day. If you have 50 routes, and within those routes, there could be a couple runs depending on, on your bell times and whatnot. Do the math, start multiplying that out. And then in the morning, noon, and night, that's just, no one can stay on top of that. But turning to technology to see what can it do, what could it do, what is possible to be able to make that review more efficient, so that the AI, if you will, the brains will, 90% of the video, nothing's flagged, but that 10%, as you noted, Tony, that could be the difference between, nothing and $16.2 million in the settlement.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I know also in our upcoming June issue that you guys, if you haven't seen it yet, we have many a story in there. We're talking also about, technology and routing and optimization. There's many other tech that goes into a bus. Now, this is more of a visual tech, obviously, with the video. But, when we start to look at other elements, are there certain routes that are more egregious than others? Are there rougher situations? Are there certain student manifests? I mean, we talked a little bit about, you were talking about taking attendance on the vehicles, right? Are there certain students that are riding certain buses that are causing more frequent incidents that we're starting to see? And can that be flagged? That can be measured? How can that adjust the potential profile of the students riding that vehicle? I mean, we definitely talk about trying to look at behavioral issues of students that may have a certain, how do I put it? I think precursor to violence, or they have behavioral outbursts or things like that could affect the other students on the bus. And realistically, you want to take corrective action so it doesn't become an incident. It doesn't become a lawsuit. And And these are all things that are part of the process of using your technology to its fullest. So very interesting discussion. I think the time will tell as the technology evolves, Ryan, but we'll keep reporting on it as it comes.
Absolutely. And a closing thought on that too is here is the visual evidence that many school administrators, principals need to be seeing, because that's another thing that I've heard over the years, time and time again, is that the building administrators aren't listening or necessarily believing what transportation is telling them about student behavior. They're not getting that support. I hear that from folks all the time. So again, you have the video, and if it's been a challenge to find these incidences and be able to share them, especially, it doesn't get to the point where it's going to lead to a lawsuit, and you can share that with your administrator, your principal, and say, see, here's what our drivers are dealing with every day. You're discounting this, but you don't discount it when it happens in the classroom. You can't discount it when it happens in the bus, and here's your evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about the June issue, I know there were some top line stories that we were covering, like EPA Clean School Bus Program and regulation updates, science of routing and optimization with tech. We've got a little bit of a recap from the ACT Expo on trends and solutions. Got a Q&A with Patrick Dwan, the co-president, CEO over at Ride. So lots of great stories. I know our own Claudia Newton cooked up a great recap from our Green Bus Summit out in Charlotte, North Carolina, which we obviously have that as well coming up at STN Expo West. So a lot of previews going on, a lot of conference stuff. So we definitely have a lot to digest coming up here. So guys, definitely invite you to go over and check out that June issue, see what's happening, maybe find out why greener school buses are great for you and the health of your students and student success. So some good stories in there, and guys touch on that and learn more.
So Nation, in our June issue, also my column touches on electric school buses, surprise, surprise, and an interesting development that we were notified about a couple weeks ago coming out of the New York State. So a lot of you know that New York has that mandate. 2027 is when school districts need to start purchasing only electric school buses with a deadline of 2035 to basically turn their fleet over. A lot of head shaking and hand wringing has been going on for several years on that. How are school districts going to meet those mandates? Spoken with a lot of school district administrators, and they don't know how they're going to do it. Some of the smaller districts, on one hand, because of Clean School Bus Program, are maybe a little bit better positioned just because they have a smaller fleet, but yet, as we know, in New York, it gets very cold. There is a lot of different terrain out there. You could be coastal. You could be there on Manhattan in New York City, Long Island. You could head out to Adirondacks. You could be out west where it's bitterly cold, even up north. So there's a lot of parameters or things to deal with electric school bus implementation. And certainly the funding has been an issue. This provision that was added to the state budget that was approved early last month, signed by Governor Kathy Hochul. On one hand, as I note in my column, it offered an extension to school districts that are having hardships meeting that deadline. So it extended out to 2009. There was a previous one-year extension that was available if they demonstrated a hardship in purchasing or implementing electric school buses. They added another year. But folks I've talked to indicate to me that the counterbalance to that was that legislators, in their infinite wisdom, added Article 11C to this state budget, which essentially requires independent third-party range testing in all conditions. So we're talking about road conditions, geography, we're talking about weather. Now, these New York School Bus Distributors Association is really up in arms in this, and they were fighting this tooth and nail the entire time. And I still see a lot of room for negotiation, Tony, over the coming months as we look at, oh yeah, by the way, this is all supposed to happen by January 1st, 2026. Oh yes, and if a school bus is not certified to one of these tests that really don't exist, there's $1,000 fine. Is it on the dealer? Is it on the OEM? But essentially every school bus, electric school bus sold into New York State must have this independent third-party test, because legislators said, okay, we're tired of seeing one number reported by the OEMs in terms of range, but then hearing from school districts that that's not accurate. So here you go. Here's this test. As I mentioned, no test per se, at least readily available, exists. I mean, you could ostensibly have something performed at a university. I mentioned West Virginia University. Another contact I spoke with mentioned UC Riverside, University of California, Riverside, out west. Well, that doesn't do much good if you have buses in New York. There's University of Michigan, perhaps Altoona testing in Pennsylvania that does a lot of the emission testing for transit under the FTA. But again, there, like a lot of legislation, Tony, there's a lack of detail. And the devil's in the details, as one source told me last week. So on one hand, it looks like it's designed to try to make electric school bus adoption improved. And I think there's a need for that more legitimate range on all these different models. But the way this is written and this mandate, and especially that it has to be enforced by January 1st of this coming year, that's going to put a lot of people in a big predicament. So, some of the folks I was talking to, Tony, I think that there's some options out there. It's not a perfect solution. So, we have telematics data from school buses. I'm told, though, that a lot of those telematics are not granular enough yet, especially when you're talking about battery information. A lot of that is proprietary. If you are able to pull anything, it's basically gobbledygook. So it's being able to read that. It's being able to act on it, know what it's telling you. So a lot of unknowns in the state budget proposal. Like I mentioned, a lot of folks in New York, especially the New York dealers side, are up in arms. And I spoke with a couple contractors, as well. I hadn't spoken to any school districts yet. I don't know if they're fine-tuned looking at this, and they might think, oh, what does it have to do with me? Well, again, if you're ending up making electric school buses even more expensive in the state, if you're putting this onus on whether it be the dealer, whether it be the OEM, yes, everyone's in agreement that this more detailed, more accurate real-world range is necessary. But how are you going to enforce that? If there's a $1,000 fine, is this basically like another carbon credit where the dealer's just, okay, we'll pay the $1,000 fine, and is it per bus? It seems to read that way. Where does the money go? I reached out to the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, which oversees the zero emissions school bus program and implementation there. They gave me some answers, but not a lot of detail. They indicated these kind of tests can be done. And again, the folks I'm talking to say that's not so easy. And then what happens to the fine? Is a program set up to help defray the costs to this testing, to this research, to this data? I'm not sure, but something for everyone, especially if you're in New York, to pay attention to. And I think just industry wide, because think what happens in New York, we have, it's a fleet of 50,000 school buses. They're replacing, if they're replacing 10% of those a year, that's a big piece of the annual production. Those costs are going to have to be spread around. And so this is potentially something that could make electric school buses even more expensive industry-wide, whether you're in New York, California, Florida, Texas, wherever you reside. All right, before we transition to Taylor's interview, we have this brief message from our sponsor.
Hey guys, what do software, hardware, and safety have in common? One word: TransFinder. At the STN Expo in Reno, TransFinder won 3 Innovation Choice Awards voted on by STN Expo attendees for best software, best hardware, best safety technology. TransFinder's Route Finder plus routing solution and apps, Stop Finder and Wayfinder, are well known in the industry. Not everyone realizes TransFinder provides hardware like card readers, tablets, and mounts. And as for safety, Patrol Finder for schools is TransFinder's latest solution designed to make buses and campuses safer. TransFinder's president and CEO, Antonio Civitella, said the recognition means so much because it's voted on by STN Expo attendees. Civitella said, "We know a lot is riding on TransFinder because a lot is riding on those yellow buses that travel through our communities. TransFinder must continue to innovate as more is being expected of transportation departments from district leadership as well as parents." Learn more at transfinder.com. That's transfinder.com.
Hello, nation. Taylor Ekbatani here. I am with 2 Ohioans, so that's fun. I have Mike Miller. He's the Director of Transportation at Sycamore Community Schools in Ohio, and Todd Silverthorn, the Transportation Director for Kettering City Schools. Welcome, guys. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So like I said, both of you guys are in Ohio, and we're going to jump into kind of the greater Ohio picture in a second. But can we start, can you provide a little bit of background on who you guys are, how you got in the industry, just for some listeners who maybe aren't super familiar? We'll start with Mike, if you want to start.
Okay. Again, good afternoon. I am the Transportation Director for Sycamore Community Schools. We are a suburb in Hamilton County. We're about 10, 15 minutes away from the city of Cincinnati. This is actually, I will be starting my 37th year in education this year. I actually started driving a school bus, no age cracks. I actually started driving a school bus in 1993 to supplement my teaching income. I'm actually an educator by trade. I drove a school bus the entire time that I taught. When I got into school administration, I still drove, and I got into this side of school administration back in 2003. So I've been a transportation director, and I've been the transportation director at Sycamore for the past, I will be starting my 12th year.
Wow.
I'm a licensed onboard instructor in the state of Ohio. I have been since 2003. I am the current president of the Ohio Association for Pupil Transportation. I'm also a PDS instructor for the National Association for Pupil Transportation.
So you keep yourself busy.
Too busy, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Todd, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So I started in transportation in 2002, became a driver. In 2006, I became a certified on-bus instructor like Mike. So did that for quite some time. And then 2011, started my transportation supervisor journey with Vandalia Butler City Schools. Worked for a contractor for a year and a half. And then for the past almost 10 years, I've been here at Kettering City Schools. We're located just outside of Dayton, Ohio. So not too far from Mike, about 45 minutes, I would assume. So yeah, it's been fun. So gosh, thinking about it now, it's been 23 years in the industry. It's hard to believe. But enjoyed the job, and like Mike, I'm part of the Ohio Association for Pupil Transportation. I'm currently the second vice president for the association. I also help organize our conference and make sure that's all up and going, and try to help, do our publicity for the association and whatnot. So keeps us busy, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I do have to correct Todd on only one item, and I never correct Todd because I feel the wrath of it afterwards. Todd doesn't assist with our annual conference. Todd is actually almost solely responsible for planning and executing our annual conference. It would not be done without him. So
that takes a lot of work. That right there, I mean, come on, we got to give it to you. That takes a lot of work.
I will say that, this year we have seen a drastic uptick in attendance numbers. Usually we're about 220, 225. We just hit the 270 mark today. So we are super excited about that. So, and we're 2 weeks out from conference, so it's hard to believe.
Wow, that's awesome.
And one more shameless plug for our conference, and I promise we'll get moving, because our conference has mainly been geared towards supervisors. And a few of us got together, and Todd was like, what if we take one day and dedicate it to drivers and invite drivers just to see what the feel would be? We're at capacity. We have how many drivers registered this year, Todd?
I think there's 209 registered.
Wow.
And this is our first time doing this.
Yeah.
So to say we're excited is an understatement.
Yeah, that's awesome. You guys will have to send us pictures or something and we can post on socials or, our website.
Absolutely. Happy to do that.
Awesome. Okay, so Mike, you were selected as the Outstanding Transportation Director of the Year in Ohio by the Ohio Association of School Business Officials. So that's super exciting. Congratulations. I mean,
Thank
what
you.
did that mean to you?
Actually, it was kind of a bit of a surprise, because I've been in the business for a long time, and Todd will hopefully be the first to tell you, I'm not really one on accolades and praise. I do this because I love it. If I didn't love the industry, I wouldn't be here. And when I found out I was nominated, it was a huge honor. But to find out I actually received the award was just mind blowing. I was deeply, deeply touched.
Well deserved.
The press release kind of mentioned, your leadership, and it touched on that. How would you kind of describe your leadership?
I'm one of those individuals that, good, better, and different. My leadership style is I lead with my heart. And sometimes that gets me into a little bit of trouble. But I think part of the reason why I do that is because not only do I love this industry, but equally so, I have so much love for kids. And that, at the end of the day, that's why we do this. I truly, firmly believe that I don't care if you are a transportation supervisor or a bus driver or a monitor or a mechanic or somebody that works in a cafeteria or a custodian. We are all educators. We all have that unique ability to touch the lives of kiddos on a daily basis. For a school bus driver in particular, it is extremely critical, because for some of our kiddos today, that bus driver may be the first adult that they see in the morning, and that they may be the last adult they see when they get off that bus in the afternoon.
Yeah, and that certainly shows too with your conference, and now opening that up to bus drivers. You kind of are touching, a whole new group of people, which leans on that kind of passion and that kind of love that you guys have.
Exactly. I'm also, I don't want to give the perception, nor hopefully would I ever, that I am a one-man show, because that is not the case. And I don't want people to think that the term is overused also, but in my district, or whether it's serving on our OAPT board, we're a team. We make decisions together. We execute plans together. It's not just one person that does everything, except in the case for our conference. Todd pretty much has done it all.
Well, that's great. And I know another thing that you focus on is operational efficiency. And we talked a little bit about that earlier for the June issue. So stay tuned for that. That'll be out in a couple of days. But looking at routing and cutting bus stops, and you cut over 600 bus stops at your district, which is wild.
Yep, I have. There's a gentleman that's been here with the district for 19 years. His name's Tony Huber. He is my assistant director. And he put an incredible amount of work into that project. We actually started, I got hired in 2014, and one of the directives that I was given was do not make any changes. Just sit back and observe for 1 year. And at the end of that first year, Tony and I got together and talked about how we could make things more efficient. One of the things that I noticed throughout the school year in riding with drivers, because that year I took to learn the district, we were stopping at driveway after driveway after driveway and going into apartment complexes and things like that we had no business being in. So he and I sat down in June of that, at the end of my first year, and looked at where we could streamline and where we could be more efficient. And in that first year alone, we cut 636 school bus stops. and we eliminated 4 routes that first year, but still gave the same level of service that we did the year before.
That's awesome. And then I know you kept cutting routes, and I think you guys are sitting at 45 now.
They're at 45 routes now and still delivering the same amount of service.
Which is important to do in a school bus driver shortage, right? If you can operate at the same level of service with less routes, I mean, you're kind of killing the game.
Yeah, because one of the things that Tony works very hard on and we take a very close look at is utilizing our bus capacities to the fullest extent. There are a district or two that surround me that once they hit that 48 mark on a bus per seat, they stop. And then, if it gets beyond that, they shift around or they add another bus. We don't have that luxury. I know in Kettering, Todd does not have that luxury. So we are constantly looking to utilize the capacity in our buses to the fullest extent.
And looking at routing, and Todd, you can jump in on this conversation too, but looking at routing software and routers, how does all of it integrate? How do obviously routers aren't going to be completely taken over by technology or AI. So how does that dynamic kind of work in your guys' districts?
So we just transitioned 2 years ago to TransFinder. And for the most part, myself and my assistant do all the routing here within the department. And I think what people need to keep in mind is that we need to keep the human aspect to routing there instead of just taking like the one-touch routing systems or, computer generated routes, because what may make sense in the one-touch routing doesn't make sense necessarily for your district or for certain stop areas. So I think, utilizing those systems and the tools that they have, you always have to take the human aspect and put it into that play and make sure that what's happening is going to be beneficial and safe for the kids.
Mike, did you want to expand on that at all?
Nope. Todd nailed it.
Okay, perfect.
Because I mean, in the land of utopia, one touch would be wonderful and phenomenal and fantastic. But as Todd alluded to, one touch doesn't know your district. One touch doesn't know your clientele, and one touch doesn't know your drivers.
Looking at technology, is there anything that you guys are focused on this school year? Anything you want to adopt?
So we just did a huge rollout of technology in our district. I think I overloaded my staff the year that we rolled all this out. So we just put Zonar on all of our entire fleet. Not only did we do that, but we also launched Wayfinder, which is the turn-by-turn navigation routing software for the tablets on the buses. So all the pre-trip inspection is done, through Zonar. Turn-by-turn navigation is done through the tablet. So there was a little bit of a learning curve for everybody. And, I think just the more that staff is utilizing it and seeing the benefit of it, I think is huge for us. We started using StopFinder, which is the way that we can communicate with parents. So that has been huge with, if we have a mechanical breakdown or heaven forbid, we have a fender bender to where we're going to be delayed, we can notify parents within minutes versus the old call them on the phone. And by the time you're done with 50 kids, it's 3 hours later. So.
And when did you implement all this?
About 2 years ago.
Okay. So you're just kind of now seeing, how it's created some efficiencies in the operation?
Yep. Yeah. And it's the other piece that, we have, which is Bike Curve, which is our payroll software. Being able to upload those routes into the payroll software and see where we might have a delay that, was unexpected during the routes, which we may have to increase times or see where the benefits in payroll would be. It's huge.
What are you guys focused on, Mike?
Well, as Todd, we've had Zonar on our buses for a number of years. We are currently in the process of changing routing software. We are currently with Versatrans, and we are migrating over to TransFinder. So once we get that migration complete, it'll then be utilizing, trying to utilize the rest, bringing the rest of those tools in our district, as Todd alluded to, such as the tablets. I think it's also very important to mention at this point, when you talk about technology, we also need to touch on safety. Todd and Teresa Ritchie, who is our first vice president for OAPT, and myself have been working with legislators in our state to try to get money to start handing out to school districts. And I'm being very blunt. So districts can afford to start putting some safety enhancement items on their buses. For example, cameras on the outside for red light violators. Again, things that districts can do to enhance safety. That technology to me is equally as important as a routing software or what have you.
I think many would agree with that. Yeah. So speaking of legislators, I think this is a good time to open it up to the greater conversation of what's kind of going on in Ohio. But you guys have been in the news lately, and it's not been necessarily positive. Unfortunately, an 18-year-old Alfred Hale who attended Dayton Public Schools was shot and killed at a transit hub downtown. And I know that's kind of sparked a lot of debate. I don't know, Todd, if you kind of want to fill in the details and background on that.
Sure. So one of the options that we have to help with student transportation here in Ohio is to use public transit. There's a lot of the bigger cities. I know Cincinnati, Dayton, I believe Columbus may use CODA. But, for high school students, it's another option for them to provide transportation into the high schools to where, if they're facing the driver shortage, like most of us are, it gives them another option to help, facilitate additional tiers or additional routes into the schools. And so what has happened since this incident, which was tragic, it sparked a lot of controversy of, should high school students be riding public transit? But I think the greater thing to look at is the resources that the states are providing. And or I should say lack of resources. There's been a lot of law that's been put into play. Most recent was, I believe, 2, maybe 3 years ago, which was the non-compliance piece for Ohio districts. So if there's a report that, during the driver shortage, even the pandemic, we couldn't provide services, lawmakers passed a bill stating that if you are non-compliant for 10 days in a certain period of time, the district would be deemed non-compliant. And the initial round of this bill was that the daily funding for your transportation operation was to be pulled from you, and it was going to go back into the general fund. There was several lawsuits, Columbus City Schools, Groveport Madison, I believe Dayton Public, all were, fined, and there was a lawsuit that was initiated by each of those districts. Law changes came up again to where now that if you are found non-compliant, the amount of money that you were is reduced by the route. Those funds would then go to the families of those who were, not provided services on that day.
There's one important piece here, Taylor, that I know Todd was about to mention, so I apologize for stealing his thunder. But this is something that he and I work very closely on and are very passionate about. Ohio is one of, Todd, 5 states?
I believe so.
We are one of a very small handful of states in the United States that is required to provide transportation to non-public, parochial, and charter school students that live within 30 minutes of their homes, of what their home school of attendance would be. So when you talk about that non-compliance piece, a lot of that has to do with transporting those particular kiddos to those particular schools. Not because we didn't want to, it's because we didn't have the resources to do so. And as Todd also mentioned, our lawmakers, for lack of a better term, you'll learn that I am very blunt, thought it appropriate to punish those school districts for not being able to provide that service. Additionally, what our Ohio lawmakers have done over the past couple of years, in the past, if we deem a school or if we deem kiddos that attend a certain private non-pub or charter school impractical to transport, a family would receive a stipend for transporting their kiddos. Over the past couple years, the amount of that stipend has doubled to tripled, depending on the amount of money the district agrees to pay. That is for each child that is deemed impractical to transport.
Wow. And I know a big conversation with the legislator too, and there's a House bill out there right now. I think might be in the Senate. I'm not, you guys probably know where it is right now, but that is looking at eliminating public transit transfer stops. And I know there's a lot more to this bill, but what would that do to your guys' operation, especially, with this contingency or with this law that you still have to transport charter and private schools? Because I know OAPT put out a whole statement on it, and Dayton Public Schools as well. And you guys put out the statement agreeing with what they were saying, but essentially the legislators kind of missed the mark.
Absolutely.
Yep. And again, I don't mean to steal Todd's thunder, but in Ohio, high school transportation grades 9 through 12 is not compulsory. We don't have to do it. That being said, when you look at our kiddos, and I'm just going to use the kiddos in Dayton or Cincinnati or Columbus, our larger cities, that's the only way. Public transit's the only way our kiddos can get to school. Mom and dad can't take them. It's too far for them to travel by foot. That's the only means of transportation they have.
And I think one thing to keep in mind is it's going to overload the public district, with the responsibility of providing yellow bus transportation, something that, we're not capable of doing currently. So we're relying on public transit. And it's not like anybody from, the state is looking at helping with the driver shortage. I think if you go and look back at any of the surveys that we've provided and we've talked with, legislators about, it's about hours, it's about hourly wage. It's all about what would retain quality people to work for your district. And granted, if you look back in the day, it was retirees, it was moms, some dads who, had children within the elementary schools at the time that wanted to come and work for us, that have the same working schedules. We don't have that anymore. A lot of retirees, once they're retired, they don't want to, take on the responsibility of, 50, 60 kids behind them in a big yellow bus. The uptick in behaviors. We've got a lot of behaviors that, back when I first started driving in 2002, that we don't have necessarily the support. We have to provide, all these additional requirements to make sure kids are receiving transportation. And, a FAPE plays into this, making sure that kids are getting their education. And if, transportation's the hiccup in, providing them their educational field, then we put them on the bus and, drivers don't feel supported. So, there's a whole big realm of things, that play into this. But if we focus strictly on what, lawmakers are doing, they're essentially taking the platform out from under the public districts and telling us that we need to focus on our private and charter schools before we would prioritize our public schools, which is a huge issue.
Todd, do you know the numbers off the top of your head? Because I cannot remember the number of drivers we had pre-COVID versus the number of drivers in Ohio we have now.
I can get that for you.
Because it is a staggering amount less.
So in August of 2024, Ohio had 18,817 active school bus drivers. That is down nearly 7,000. So we had almost 25,000 in the state, which is huge. If you look at those numbers, you think about 7,000 bus drivers less on the road providing services. That's unbelievable.
Especially with the requirement to provide more service.
Yep, and that's why I mentioned that, Taylor, because we're expected. Our Ohio lawmakers are expecting us to do a lot more with a lot less.
So I know there was bullet points to your guys' press release that you sent out, and you kind of agreed with what Dayton was saying. But what, from OAPT standpoint, what needs to change in regard to student safety and the transportation crisis that's kind of going on in the state?
It's key that you say safety. because the safety aspect of this is instrumental for what needs to be done. And let me explain that a little bit. So essentially, we're 7,000 school bus drivers less than the state, okay, which we're expected to provide the same, if not more, services than prior. So if you look at daily coverage, absenteeism, stuff like that, there's not a lot of subs for districts to do. So we're requiring you to provide the same level of service. We have to figure out and come up with this huge elaborate scheme on how to make sure everything is covered. And you want us to do it safely, but doubling back to schools, hurrying back to schools, the rushing of drivers from one building to the other, something's going to happen and it's not going to be great. We're going to have an accident. We're going to get kids hurt. Heaven forbid you have a student that isn't paying attention to the sub driver who is rushing to get from one stop to the other, doesn't watch a hand signal, and gets hit by a car. So they need to look at the safety aspect of this. The driver shortage plays part into that safety aspect. So if you want to fix what's happening in Ohio, you need to start at the safety piece of it first. Stop requiring us to do all this charter and non-pub stuff, which there's more charter and non-pubs than there are public districts here in the state of Ohio. And all of that we have to do within 30 minutes of the child's home school. So for me, I can go almost a full entire county north of the Dayton area to provide services to 7 kids. That's not fair to the public district. So for me not to get a compliance, I have to take 7 kids 30 minutes out of the way and not provide. Well, there was one day just within the last month, I had to cancel 4 routes, public routes. We are triple tiered. So if we have 60 kids per bus, per route, it's 180 times 4. So, I mean, you tell me how this is making sense. It's not.
No.
And for lawmakers to state that public education in Ohio needs to be fixed, but we need to focus more money to the schools that are being able to provide higher quality education, such as charter schools or the non-pub schools who can focus and is not restricted to what is being taught as much as the public schools. Why don't we look at fixing the public schools first and raising that quality of education so when people leave out with a diploma, they are more ready for the workforce than ever before. Stop focusing on the private, charter, and non-pub schools. It make sense, right?
Yeah, and that's where, because another thing that they had done, this was a couple years ago, they told us it was okay. You know, if you don't have a bus for those kiddos, it's okay. You can put them in a van. You can put them in a van. Now, of course, the van has to, be properly marked and the person has to be van certified. But think about that for a second. Would you rather have your kiddo in a 40-foot school bus that's the absolute safest vehicle to be on the road in the United States, or virtually put them in mom's minivan to take them to school? If you put those kiddos in a van, there's no way to safely load and unload those kids unless you pull into their driveway. And if you have a group of public kiddos that are standing at a corner stop and they see a van pulling into the driveway of a parochial kiddo to pick them up, I mean, to me, the safety aspect's the most important thing. But you also have to look at John Q. taxpayer whose kiddos go to public school, whose tax dollars are going to that public school, and they're thinking, okay, why does Johnny get a van in his driveway? My kids have to walk a quarter of a mile to a corner. Yeah,
it definitely sounds like the House Bill 96 was very reactionary to kind of the situation that happened. And, while I agree, it's a tragedy, right? That 18-year-old being killed is nothing that anyone wants to read about, nothing no one wants to see. And so it sounds like something needs to change. It just isn't exactly what the lawmakers are saying.
Yeah, there's a couple lawmakers out there right now that it's clear they've never stepped foot into a school transportation facility, that for some reason have the upper hand in determining how their constituents vote and reshape the way that Ohio provides public transportation for students. And the one thing that has always baffled me, and I've never quite understood how the federal government doesn't help provide monies and funding for school transportation when we're the largest mass transit system in the U.S. I just don't understand that. And I think with the way that the new administration is with cutting the education department at the federal level, it's concerned of what potentially lies ahead for us. Because, I mean, the first thing that you always see, whether it's within, school districts around the nation, the first thing they cut is transportation when there's not a lot of funds, levies fail, anything like that. So if we're reducing the amount of monies that schools are receiving federally, what's that mean for school transportation? I think we're just at the beginning of seeing what's going to happen over the next 4 years.
Yeah, and we're continuing to watch and monitor kind of what that fallout would look like at the school district and also the transportation level. So definitely stay tuned to stnonline.com for that. But I do want to thank you both for jumping on and sharing your insights on everything happening. Congratulations to Mike again on Transportation Director of the Year. But thank you both for joining us on today's podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
A special thanks to Ryan and Taylor for jumping on, as well as Michael and Todd for joining the interview. Really great conversation. We appreciate you guys being here. We also appreciate our sponsors, TransFinder and School Radio. Guys, make sure and check them out at the upcoming STN Expo West Conference. They'll both be there. They'll be at our Transportation Directors Summit. They'll be at the Bus Technology Summit. They'll be at the trade show. They're literally going to be everywhere, so you can't miss them. Go say hi. Tell them you heard about them on the STN podcast and how much you enjoy them being the sponsor and bringing all this great content to you every week. Guys, make sure you visit stnonline.com for our latest news and analysis on everything happening in the school transportation industry. Guys, don't forget, STN Expo West early bird registration deadline is Friday, June 6th. You cannot wait any longer. If you've procrastinated, now's the time. Save $100 on your registration. Go there today, stnexpo.com/west to take advantage of all the good stuff. We've got education, keynotes, networking events, everything you need to elevate your school transportation operation. I invite you to come. Can't wait to see you there. Also, guys, don't forget, subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. You get our episodes every week, Nation, on your phone, iPad, computer, wherever you're listening. We love to have you always be on tap with us in everything happening in school transportation land. All right, Nation, we love you. We'll see you next week.